Okay.
Okay, Artemis, can you see my presentation?
Yes, we can see your screen. Just please put it on PowerPoint mode.
Okay.
Excellent.
Great.
Thank you.
I would like to start by thanking Ioannis and Artemis for their kind invitation to deliver this lecture on ancient Idalion. This opportunity reminded me of my first encounter with the archaeology of Idalion that dates back to 2005. As a PhD student, I had the opportunity to work at the excavations conducted by Dr. Maria Hadjikosti, the former director of the Department of Antiquities, at the Royal Palace, situated on the hill of Ambileri. You can imagine how impressive it was for a student of the Cypriot Iron Age to be involved in the process of unearthing the remarkably well-preserved remains of an ancient administrative center of the Cyproarchaic and Cyproclassical periods. Most importantly, to be able to discover some of the hundreds of inscribed ostraca that comprise the exceptional Idalion archive. It was indeed a wonderful experience, but I am mostly indebted to Maria Hadjikosti for entrusting me the excavation of the eastern part of the Idalion Iron Age necropolis at the locality Platya that was located during construction works in 2011. Although it was a tough first encounter with the most difficult and controversial kind of fieldwork, the kind we know as salvage excavations, it was also the first time that such a large part of the Idalion cemetery was being revealed. And despite the difficulties and shortcomings inherent in such ventures, the results in terms of new material and added knowledge are rewarding. After 10 years, the time is now ripe for the conclusive publication of this excavation. Thanks to a grant by a research project entitled Gideon, Idalion, Damassos, Cities and Territories within Cypriot Kingdoms during the first millennium BC, the excavation of Idalion Platya will be studied and published in collaboration with Dr. Anna Georgiadou, who is responsible for the ceramic finds that form the greater part of the material retrieved from the tombs. This publication aspires to add a significant corpus of Iron Age pottery to the limited material known thus far from Idalion, providing rich comparanda for the identification of the local style in ceramic production. Dr. Kirsi Lawrence of the Cyprus Institute will study the human remains. The aim is to publish a comprehensive volume in 2025. Therefore, the study of the material is at its initial stage, and as such, my lecture today is not intended to be a presentation of the cemetery per se. My paper today is an attempt to contextualize the Platya excavations in the wider history of the polis of Idalion, as indicated in the title, From Foundation to Demise. From the beginning of the Late Bronze Age at the mid-17th century BC, early forms of complex political organization appeared on Cyprus, predominantly as a result of increasing demand for Cypriot copper from surrounding Mediterranean states. Newly founded coastal settlements emerged and functioned as trading harbors. These gateway communities seem to have eventually dominated over their territories, and by the 13th century BC, they developed into regional urban centers. Idalion lies in the heart of Central Cyprus. Central Cyprus is not a formal geographic division. It is rather a geographically diverse region. In the context of the present paper, it is considered to comprise part of the south-central Messauria plain and the eastern hilly zone of the Troodos complex, and thus the easternmost metalliferous pillow lavas of the mountain range. It is traversed by the Yalias River to the north and the Tremithos River to the south. Within this diverse physical landscape, Idalion appears to have emerged at the close of the Late Bronze Age as an important settlement. Indeed, mortuary evidence and pottery scatters confirm occupation at Idalion at least by the 13th century BC. It is anticipated that publication of rescue excavations conducted by the Department of Antiquities during the past few decades will add substantial data for at least the 14th century settlement at Idalion. On the other hand, the 12th century occupation strata are plentiful. During the 12th century BC, the settlement at Idalion appears to have developed on an organized plan on the hill of Ampilleri, the hill that would accommodate centuries later the Iron Age administrative center. This fortified nucleus of Idalion encompassed the sanctuary site, one among only 16 securely identified sacred spaces of the Late Bronze Age in Cyprus. The earliest temenos atop the Idalion Acropolis produced evidence pertaining to ritual food consumption and drinking activities. Other finds of ideological significance include terracotta and bull figurines, gold jewelry and gold leaves, mace heads, seals and cylinder seals, copper and iron slag, a fragment of an ingot, and an iron knife. All seem to have been ritually connected to the figure of the mighty bull. Moreover, on the same hill, a complex of rooms with workshop and storage installations were uncovered. They date from the 12th down to the 8th century BC. The evidence points towards an organized society that was in charge of administering the copper procured in the catchment area and the management of the territory which contained the metalliferous zones. We can thus speculate that the newly founded settlement at Idalion inaugurated, just before the end of the Late Bronze Age, a state formation process within the fuzzy limits of the central part of the island. Explicit archaeological documentation is still pending, but it is highly possible that this process was based on the necessity to locally control and manage the extraction of copper of the neighboring ores, and consequently its trade in the local and foreign markets. Located on a strategic point so as to control as much as possible of the rich agricultural land of the southern Messauria plain, surrounded to the south by the rich copper deposits of the eastern Troodos pillow lavas, and with easy access to the Larnaca Bay, Idalion right from the start claimed its vital economic and political territory. The choice of place for the new establishment was a successful one. Idalion proved to be a resilient seat of local administration. This is amply reflected in the narrative of King Halkinor, who, according to Stephanus Byzantius, wandered for days before he was pointed out by the sun itself, as was the oracle's dictate, the right place to found his new polis. Halkinor, translated as the man of copper, must have preserved, through the realm of myth, the historical conditions that determined the foundation of the Idalian polis. The archaeological evidence suggests that the effect of the late 13th century BC Mediterranean crisis caused upheavals in the settlement pattern on the island, but it was by no means devastating. Cyprus did not suffer a collapse of socio-political structure, at least not at an island-wide level. This is mainly due to the fact that Cypriot and Levantine entrepreneurs created new networks of communications and material exchanges on the basis of existing late Bronze Age networks, and also expanded their maritime routes to include the Western Mediterranean. The period, however, was also characterized by a large-scale movement of people. The late Bronze Age centers of Cyprus became the recipients of Greek-speaking populations, who abandoned their homes in the Greek mainland following the collapse of the Messenian palaces. Cyprominoan, the syllabic script of late Bronze Age Cyprus, became the writing tool of their language. In its adapted form of the first millennium BC, known as Cyprosyllabic, the indigenous script of the island was employed to record the Arcado-Cypriot dialectal form of the Greek language. The corpus of inscriptions dating from the late Cypro-geometric period onwards also suggests that people speaking a Semitic language migrated to the island, bringing with them the Phoenician alphabetic script. It is not unlikely that Levantine populations were integrated in the Cypriot centers even earlier, during the 12th century BC, after the abandonment of flourishing centers in the mainland, such as Ungarit. The occurrence of the two languages, first the Greek and later the Phoenician, is the sole evidence that echoes the movement of people who targeted the thriving late Bronze Age centers of the island and were incorporated within the local population. A third language, also documented in Iron Age Cyprus and written in the Cypriot syllabary, is undecipherable. It was termed Eto-Cypriot because it is believed to represent the indigenous language spoken during the Bronze Age, surviving into the Iron Age. Following a reorganization of the settlement pattern of the island during the formative 12th century BC, the inception of the early Iron Age witnesses the consolidation of a new geopolitical configuration of the island, one that continued to sustain administrative fragmentation and an economic model based on the trade of copper. As indicated by Maria Iakovou, in spite of the island's trilingualism, the archaeological evidence does not point to the existence of different ethnic groups on early Iron Age Cyprus. On the contrary, the evidence from the Cypro-geometric necropolis points to a striking cultural homogeneity throughout the island. Within the early Iron Age horizon, Idalion began to function as a regional administrative center. Neo-Assyrian royal texts officially acclaim a number of Cypriot leaders as kings, and as such, they constitute the termini antekvos for the crystallization of the royal institution and the ascendance of the hereditary basilis, kings. The primacy of Idalion in the central part of Cyprus is by 673 BC officially affirmed by the royal prism of Esarhaddon. Among 10 Cypriot cities and their rulers, Agistor of Idalion appears first on this list. The other geographical loci mentioned on this clay prism are Chytri, Salamis, Paphos, Soli, Kurion, Tamassos, Kartigadasti, Lydra, and Nouria. It has been proposed that Nouria is Amathos or Marion, and that Kartigadasti could be either Kition or Amathos. This is the first and also the last official list of the Cypriot administrative centers of the Cypro-Archaic and Cypro-Classical period. The Cypro-Archaic period is indeed a time of consolidation as regards Idalion and its political institutions. Ampileri and Mouti Douarvili, the two hills that dominate the landscape to the south of the modern village, provided unquestionable evidence that they functioned as focal points of administrative and sacred character within the urban fabric of the Iron Age city. Ampileri accommodated the city's administrative seat and the Athina Temenos, located on the top of the hill, while Mouti Douarvili was the religious acropolis. Ongoing archaeological fieldwork has been gradually revealing critical data, which indicate that the area between the two hills and the Yalias River to the north was occupied during the period spanning from the end of the Late Bronze to the Iron Age, based on the excavation of sacred and secular areas, as well as of burial grounds. Before the end of the 6th century BC, coins bearing royal symbols and names of the ruling dynasty appear. Moreover, an inscribed bronze tablet is a treasure trove of information. This famous Idalion tablet, found on the administrative acropolis Ampileri, informs us, among others, of the existence of state officials and their names, Basileus Stasikipros, and a dignitary named Philokipros, son of Anasagoras, and of the existence of royal and public land. This tablet also documents that during the reign of this king Stasikipros, Idalion witnessed a stressful siege on behalf of the Medes and the Kydians. This siege was successfully resisted, as the document seems to suggest, but soon after, epigraphic documents inform us that the southeastern power center of Kydon eventually managed to conquer Idalion. The tombs of the Platya cemetery dating range from the early Cypro-geometric period to roughly the decades just before the annexation of Idalion by Gideon. Archaeological research has firmly established that during the course of the Iron Age, the communities at Idalion continued to use these extensive burial grounds in the zone framed by the two hills in the south and the River Lialias in the north. Several early Iron Age burials were located within this large area, spanning from the locality of Eleuthia to Kouzourtou to the west, the locality Aios Giorgios to the east, and the locality of Platya to the north. It was at the locality of Eleuthia to Kouzourtou that the build tomb of the Cypro-archaic period came to light by the excavations of the Department of Antiquities. In addition, new research on Max Onefas Richter's unpublished work by Professor Stefan Schmid and his team reveals that the record of built tombs in the city of Idalion was by far richer than previously known. Specifically, this important study has postulated the existence of as many as 12 built tombs of a possible Cypro-archaic or Cypro-classical date, which were dispersed in different localities around the Acropolis. Moreover, tombs of the Cypro-archaic period have been identified as southeast as the localities of Petrera and Aios Giorgios, that is to say, within the area that was subsequently encircled by a city wall at the beginning of the 5th century BC. Platya is the easternmost part of this extended mortuary landscape. The word itself is a Greek adjective that means wide. It is actually a wide stretch of land just below the two hills that, as I have previously mentioned, dominate the Idalion landscape, Ampeleri and Mouti του Arvili. The rescue excavation conducted in 2011-2012 at the site of Platya for the construction of the 3 roads colored in blue added important new evidence to the Cypro-geometric and Cypro-archaic periods. Suffice it to say that the discovery of 56 tombs almost doubled the known mortuary assemblages of Idalion assigned to this chronological horizon. Platya was usually flooded during the winter months, and until a few decades ago, it provided excellent material for mud bricks. We had a bitter confirmation of this fact since our excavation was conducted during the winter of 2011. That was the winter with the heaviest rainfall of the last century. Today, Platya is a heavily built area in the eastern outskirts of the modern municipality of Dali. The site was in fact known to the Department of Antiquities since at least 1953. A letter addressed to its then director, Porphyrios Dikeos, reports the locating of a tomb in the fields of Platya by a technician of the department. The area, according to the technician, was exploited by the citizens of Dali to cut mud bricks. Our rescue operation there began in October 2011, when the bulldozer hit what seemed to be a looted and obliterated tomb. It continued uninterruptedly until the end of March of 2012, with the excavation of 56 tombs. Right from the start, the bulldozer became an ally. It scraped the surface efficiently and promptly and revealed the chambers lying sometimes almost 2 meters below modern surface without any damage. My team and I would then enter the tombs from the roof of the chamber, and we could easily understand whether the burial was intact or reopened and backfilled. Surprisingly, only about half of the tombs were of the chamber type, which constitutes the typical mortuary facility in Cyprus during the period under consideration. The remainder were rather shallow shaft graves lying at a much higher level in the soil. In these cases, the bulldozer would scrape the upper surface of the pots that usually accompanied the burials. Admittedly, the assemblages of artifacts and bones were revealed, but it was not easy to delineate the shape of these shaft graves since they were filled with extremely hard soil. Locals still remember that in their childhood, following the usual flooding of the Platya fields during winter months, complete vessels would appear lying on the surface. Those were evidently the contents of such shallow burials exposed after heavy rainfalls. Right from the beginning, it became evident that our site was a cemetery of the Cyprogeometric and Cyproarchaic periods. The earliest material is a handful of late Bronze Age sherds, mainly from large pithoi, and a few decorated pieces found on the western limit of the construction works. They do not relate to any tomb context. These were probably stray finds belonging to an earlier Bronze Age settlement area that was possibly located further to the west. The chamber tombs were of large, but mainly medium and small size. They had squarish chambers and vertical walls curving up towards a domed roof. The stoneman was usually placed above the flat floor surface, and it was closed by a stone slab. Even the smallest of chambers usually contained more than one inhumations. Inside this chamber tomb, designated as locus 8, bones were also found inside large amphorae, along with an inhumation on the floor of the chamber. Large numbers of painted vessels were deposited in the chambers or the shafts. More rarely, bronze vessels and ornaments, stone or bone beads, and terracotta figurines were also found. Fragments from limestone grave stele decorated with lions or in the form of capitals were also found in relation to chamber tombs. Interestingly, the only built feature that was exposed at Platya was a circular structure with a rectangular cavity on the upper side that was identified as the base for a stele. The earliest context is locus 20, that stands out within the burial compound of the Platya necropolis for its distinctive form and nature. The feature lies on the northeastern part of the excavated area of the cemetery, and specifically to the north of a series of shaft tombs dating to later periods. Further excavations undertaken in 2018 in the plot immediately to the north of locus 20 confirmed that the feature was lying within the northernmost limit of the cemetery, since no tombs were discovered beyond this zone. Locus 20 is a shaft of roughly elliptical shape with a maximum depth of circa 80 centimeters. The offerings were placed on top of a thin layer of ash, which covered the entire surface of the pit. The material yielded from locus 20 consists almost exclusively of pottery vessels, with the exception of a stone object, possibly a spindle whorl or a bead. Locus 20 contained in total 46 objects, found either complete or in a fragmentary state of preservation. With the exception of the uppermost level of the pit, which was disturbed, the rest of the layers were found in situ, and the vessels were deposited forming different piles. The vessels do not bear any traces of fire, and evidently they were deposited inside the pit after the operation of pyri, that is, a ceremonial event involving fire. No skeletal remains, neither human nor animal, were retrieved from the shallow pit, and therefore this pyri cannot be associated with the cremation event. The necropolis of Platya has not provided, at least so far, any evidence of cremated remains, which would have been gathered as a rule in ceramic or metallic vessels and would have been deposited inside the tombs, as was the case in other cemeteries on the island during the early Iron Age or later periods. Having said that, it is important to note the rarity of cremation burials in Iron Age Cyprus, as opposed to the much more common practice of inhumation. Shallow pits attested in early Iron Age cemeteries in Cyprus have been identified either as tombs for infant burials, the skeletal remains of which were often disintegrated, as for example at the necropolis of Palepaphos, or as loci for secondary deposition of burial gifts from a tomb in order to make space for an additional burial, as for instance at the necropolis of Alas. However, the identification of such functions for the case of Idalion, Platya, locus 20 seems irrelevant due to the presence of the pyri. The excavation record rather suggests that locus 20 was an offering pit of the Cyprogeometric period, which is related to a single episode of a pyri followed by a final depositional act. Locus 20 remains a unique feature in the necropolis of Idalion Platya, and therefore it was selected to be the subject of the first publication to appear in collaboration with Drs. Anna Georgiadou and Artemis Georgiou. Locus 54 is one of the largest chamber tombs and the only one with a long dromos. The earliest burial dates to the early Cypro-geometric period, thus confirming that this is a typical early geometric architectural feature. Above the dromos of Locus 54, smaller chambers were opened in the course of the Cypro-archaic period. One of them contained the only inscribed vessel that came from this cemetery. It is a plain-ware jug of Cypro-archaic 1 or 2 date, with a syllabic inscription incised on the shoulder. Artemis Karnava, who has studied the inscription, informed me that it appears to have been executed after the firing of the pot. Inside the incisions, clear remains of reddish-brown paint are discerned, which was apparently placed in order to stress the signs on the pot's pale surface. Karnava suggests that the inscription should be read from right to left as Kerilaos or Krilaos, imi, meaning I am Kerilaos. In spite of the rather large number of Iron Age burials unearthed so far at Idalion, with the addition of the Platya excavation, they total to around 100 tomb groups. The dearth of relevant publications circumscribes any effort to study and approach the topographical development of the different localities at Idalion over time. However, a general overview of the thus far known first millennium BC mortuary assemblages from Idalion reveals a puzzling observation. The number of Cyproclassical and later burial groups is extremely low when compared to that of Cyprogeometric and Cyproarchaic date. In other words, where are the post-Cyproarchaic tombs and why aren't they archaeologically visible? The beginning of the Cyproclassical period is actually marked by a major transformation in the political status of Idalion. Sometime in the 5th century BC, the kingdom of Idalion was absorbed by Gideon. This event is fully established by 2 royal inscriptions in the Phoenician alphabet. In these inscriptions, King Balmilk II is designated as king of Gideon and Idalion, Milk in Phoenician. His father, King Ozibal, is also designated as king, Milk of Gideon and Idalion. And finally, his grandfather, Balmilk I, is simply called king of Gideon. The annexation of Idalion is therefore an achievement attributed to Ozibal and thus dated in the mid-5th century BC. Idalion's annexation by Gideon, which undoubtedly signaled the most dramatic disruption in the polity's history, paradoxically entails a series of continua. First of all, the name of Idalion was not only maintained, but it was also incorporated in the title of the king, Milk of Gideon, who thus proclaimed the geopolitical extent of his authority. Apart from Balmilk I, who is the only recorded king of Gideon, without any exceptions, all of Balmilk's the first successors, Ozibal, Balmilk II, Balrom, Milkiadon, and Bumayadon, bear the title of king of Gideon and Idalion on all epigraphic data issued by the royal dynasty. Moreover, apart from Ozibal, the king who we assume accomplished the annexation of Idalion and from whom we have no inscriptions, each and every one of the following kings of Gideon and Idalion, and also a prince, Adon in Phoenician, Balrom, dedicated at least one votive with an inscription to sanctuaries that lied within the Idalion urban nucleus. It is noteworthy that while 5 royal inscriptions issued by kings of Gideon and Idalion were dedicated to an Idalion sanctuary, only one is known to have been dedicated at Gideon. Most of these royal inscriptions were found at the sanctuary of Apollo, the Shep Mikal, located between the 2 acropolis of Idalion, on a route that most probably led to Gideon already in ancient times. The same sanctuary was the find spot of a plethora of male figures which were dedicated to the god venerated during the end of the 6th and the first half of the 5th century BC, therefore predating the royal inscriptions. These figures, which stand out for their great artistic value, were probably dedicated by eminent members of the royal dynasty of Idalion that ruled the polis until the mid-5th century. In such a case, the fact that they were neither removed nor destroyed at the time of Idalion's annexation, but retained their prominent position next to the dedications of the kings of Gideon and Idalion, underscores the desire of the new dynasty to create a linkage with the previous one. The aspiration behind this symbolically proclaimed continuity may have been to effectively absorb the Idalion territory and its natural assets, evidently the ultimate goal underlying its conquering. Moreover, by the time of Idalion's annexation by Gideon, the inextricable link of the polis with its protector, Athena Anat, had proven to be so resilient that not even the new order of things could upturn it. On the contrary, as evidenced by a Phoenician inscription dedicated by King Balmilta II to Athena, Gideon appears to have further promoted the cult of the deity associated with Idalion. Therefore, the low ratio of Cyproclassical tomb groups as compared to Cyprogeometric and Cyproarchaic assemblages does not seem to be accounted for by the conquest of Idalion by Gideon, since the inland city far from deteriorated after this event. On the contrary, following this merging, Idalion seems to have assumed the role of an economic capital. The archaic administrative center of the Greek-speaking kingdom continued to be used by the Phoenician-speaking overlords. Most importantly, the recent excavations of the administrative complex have revealed an archive in the Phoenician alphabet comprising of more than 700 inscriptions that record economic activities down to the end of the 4th century BC. Unambiguously, Idalion was of great importance for this new politico-economic formation. Moreover, for a short period of time in the 4th century BC, Milkiadon also annexed Damascus, further inland and closer to the rich metalliferous areas of Troodos Range. Idalion's administrative center that lies closer to Damascus than Gideon must have been the actual managing authority of the inland territories. Interestingly, two bilingual inscriptions in Phoenician and Greek Arcado-Cypriot were dedicated at the sanctuary at Phrankis at Damascus and refer to the dedication of two statuettes at the sanctuary during the 17th and the 30th year of the reign of King Milkiadon. As far as I know, reference to the years of the reign of kings of Gideon and Idalion have so far only been discovered within the urban fabric or the territory of the two centers. If we consider that the chronological designation is only meaningful when attested within the territory of the polity within which it was produced, then these two inscriptions indicate that the Frankisa sanctuary was located, perhaps as a frontier sanctuary, within the territory controlled by the kings of Gideon and Idalion, even before the annexation of Damascus by Milkiadon. Therefore, there are no indications that the population of Idalion decreased in the Cyproclassical period. On the contrary, the inland polis seems to have greatly augmented by joining forces with Gideon. Hence, the missing evidence from the mortuary record is all the more intriguing, and the available evidence cannot provide an adequate answer to this issue. Idalion's status did start to decline following the abolition of the Cypriot city kingdoms at the close of the Cyproclassical period. In his monumental work, Bibliotheca Historica, Diodorus, the ancient historian who lived in the 1st century BC, describes with detail the violent episodes that resulted in the extermination of every single royal dynasty of Cyprus by Ptolemy I in the closing years of the 4th century BC. With the abolition of the autonomous Cypriot polities, Alexander's successor in Egypt incorporated the island into the Hellenistic state of Alexandria. However, deep-seated cultural elements transcend the transition to the new colonial era. Most importantly, the seats of power of the abolished Cypriot polities, namely Gideon, Salamis, Lapithos, Amathus, Kurion, Paphos, Mario Narsinoi and Soli, continued to function as the island's urban settlements, but not Idalion. Idalion was reduced to a secondary rural community soon after its royal administrative infrastructure and mechanism collapsed. The new political and economic order did not sustain an inland urban center. Nevertheless, it was never fully abandoned, as Hellenistic and Roman settlement strata suggest, and also a number of medieval monuments indicate. As a matter of fact, today's settlement Dali continue to proudly bear the same as in antiquity. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Στην ύστερη εποχή του Χαλκού διαμορφώθηκαν τα πρώτα πολιτιακά κέντρα στην Κύπρο ως αποτέλεσμα της πίεσης που άσκησαν τα κράτη και οι αυτοκρατορίες της Ανατολικής Μεσογείου προς το νησί για εντατικοποίηση της παραγωγής του χαλκού και της υπερπόντιας εμπορίας του. Οι πλήστες από αυτές τις θέσεις εντοπίζονται στην ακτή και αποτελούσαν πρωτίστως λιμάνια εξαγωγής του χαλκού και άλλων προϊόντων και εισαγωγής άλλων ειδών. Τα ευρήματα από το Idalion, κυρίως στην περιοχή της μετέπειτα Ακρόπολης της εποχής του Σιδήρου, μαρτυρούν ότι στον 13ο και κυρίως στον 10ο αιώνα π.Χ. το Idalion, αν και δεν βρίσκεται στην ακτή, αναπτύσσεται ως ένας σημαντικός οικισμός με διοικητικές λειτουργίες στην κεντρική Κύπρο. Η μεσογειακή κρίση του τέλους του 13ου αιώνα π.Χ., αν και οδήγησε σε κατάρρευση της πλήστες κρατικές οντότητες της ύστερης χαλκοκρατίας, όπως για παράδειγμα τις Μικηναϊκές πόλεις κράτη και την αυτοκρατορία των Χετθαίων, δεν είχε τον ίδιο αντίκτυπο στην Κύπρο. Το Idalion δεν εγκαταλείπεται, αλλά όπως μαρτυρούν και πάλι τα αρχαιολογικά δεδομένα, συνεχίζει να λειτουργεί ως κεντρικής σημασίας θέση στην πρώιμη εποχή του Σιδήρου. Στην πρώιμη εποχή του Σιδήρου είναι ορατή και μια σημαντική αλλαγή στο γλωσσικό περιβάλλον του νησιού. Η ερμηνεία των διαθέσιμων δεδομένων, αρχαιολογικών και επιγραφικών, υποδεικνύει ότι ήδη πριν από το τέλος της εποχής του Χαλκού, ελληνόφωνοι πληθυσμοί από τον Αιγαιακό κόσμο είχαν σημαντική παρουσία στα αστικά κέντρα του νησιού. Η γλώσσα τους γίνεται βασική γλώσσα στο νησί στην εποχή του Σιδήρου και μάλιστα καταγράφεται από τον 11ο αιώνα και εξής με το γηγενές σλαβικό σύστημα γραφής του νησιού, γνωστό ως κυπρομινωική γραφή. Η κυπρομινωική γραφή, που χρησιμεύε για την καταγραφή των άγνωστων γλωσσών που ομιλούνταν στην ύστερη χαλκοκρατία στο νησί, προσαρμόζεται για να καταγράφει την ελληνική γλώσσα. Στην προσαρμοσμένη της μορφή την ονομάζουμε κυπροσυλλαβική γραφή. Σε μια παρόμοια διαδικασία, πληθυσμοί από τη Συροπαλαιστινιακή ακτή που μιλούσαν την φοινικική γλώσσα, φαίνεται ότι στην πρώιμη εποχή του Σιδήρου εγκαταστάθηκαν σε διάφορες περιοχές του νησιού. Φοινικικές επιγραφές, γραμμένες με το φοινικικό αλφάβητο, ανεβρίσκονται στο νησί από τον 1ο μέχρι τον 3ο αιώνα π.Χ. και μαρτυρούν ότι η φοινικική γλώσσα υπήρξε βασικό συστατικό του κυπριακού γλωσσικού περιβάλλοντος στην εποχή αυτή. Μια επιγραφή του Νεοασσύριου βασιλιά Εσαρχαδόνα καταγράφει τον πρώτο και τελευταίο κατάλογο κυπριακών βασιλικών κέντρων το έτος 673 π.Χ. Σε αυτόν τον κατάλογο το Idalion και ο βασιλιάς του Ακίστρο αναφέρονται πρώτοι. Πράγματι, οι νομισματικές κομπές της πόλης που ξεκινούν στο τέλος του 6ου αιώνα π.Χ. μαζί με επιγραφές σε συνδυασμό με το αρχαιολογικό υλικό μαρτυρούν ότι το Idalion υπήρξε η έδρα μιας βασιλικής δυναστείας τουλάχιστον στην κυπροαρχαϊκή εποχή. Οι 56 τάφοι που ανασκάφηκαν το 2011 από το Τμήμα Αρχαιοτήτων στο πλαίσιο σωστικών ανασκαφών κατά τη δημιουργία νέων δρόμων στο Γάλλι ανήκουν στα χρόνια της ύπαρξης της αυτόνομης πολιτείας του Ιδαλίου, δηλαδή στην κυπρογεωμετρική και κυπροαρχαϊκή περίοδο. Ανεβρέθηκαν στην τοποθεσία Πλατιά, που αποτελεί το ανατολικό άκρο του μεγάλης έκτασης νεκροταφείου του αρχαίου Ιδαλίου, στα βόρεια των δύο λόφων ακροπόλεων, της Αμπιλερής και της Μούτσης του Αρβίλη. Οι τάφοι ανήκουν στο γνωστό για την εποχή του Σιδήρου τύπο του λαξευτού θαλαμοειδού τάφου με δρόμο, αν και μεγάλος αριθμός ανήκει στον τύπο του απλού λάρχου. Τα ευρήματα είναι τα συνήθη χτερίσματα που ανεβρίσκονται σε αυτές τις ταφές, δηλαδή ως επιτοπλίστων πύληνα αγκία, αλλά και λίγα μεταλλικά αντικείμενα. Συνδυάζοντας το τεκμήρο από αυτή τη νέα ανασκαφή, όσο και από τις παλαιότερες ανασκαφές τάφους του Idalion, προκύπτει η διαπίστωση ότι η συντριπτική πλειονότητα των τάφων που έχουν ανασκαφεί χρονολογούνται στην κυπρογεωμετρική και την κυπροαρχαϊκή περίοδο, με ελάχιστους γνωστούς τάφους της κυπροκλασσικής περίοδου. Γνωρίζουμε ότι κατά την κυπροκλασσική περίοδο το Idalion κατακτήθηκε από το Κίτιο, το οποίο διοικούνταν από μια δυναστεία βασιλέων με φοινικικά ονόματα. Όμως η κατάκτηση αυτή δεν κατέληξε στην εγκατάλειψη την υποβάθμιση του Ιδαλίου. Αντίθετα, από τη στιγμή της κατάκτησης, το Idalion αποτελεί χωρίς εξαίρεση μέρος του τίτλου του βασιλιά του Κιτίου.
Παράλληλα, το βασιλικό κέντρο της κυπροαρχαϊκής περίοδου αυξάνεται και μετατρέπεται στο βασιλικό κέντρο της Νέας Πολιτείας, ασκώντας από εκεί διοικητικό έλεγχο σε μεγάλο μέρος της κεντρικής Κύπρου. Μάλιστα, για ένα σύντομο διάστημα, ο βασιλιάς του Κιτίου και του Ιδαλίου Μελκιάδων κατάφερε να κατακτήσει και την Δαμασσό, την οποία χωρίς αμφιβολία θα έλεγχε από το κέντρο στο Ιδάλιο. Συνεπώς, η κατάκτηση δεν αποτελεί εξήγηση για τον αόρατο αρχαιολογικά ταφικό ορίζοντα του Ιδαλίου. Η υποβάθμιση του Ιδαλίου ξεκινά στην ελληνιστική περίοδο, μετά δηλαδή από την κατάλυση των κυπριακών πολιτιών από τον Πτολεμαίο τον Πρώτο. Αν και οι υπόλοιπες πόλεις του νησιού, όπως για παράδειγμα το Κίτιον, η Σαλαμίνα, η Πάφος και η Αμαθούντα, συνεχίζουν να αποτελούν αστικά κέντρα μέσα στο νέο πολιτιακό και πολιτισμικό περιβάλλον, το Idalion εκπίπτει σε μια αγροτική κοινότητα. Μια κοινότητα όμως με αξιοθαύμαστη μακροζωία, με αδιάλειπτη κατοίκηση μέχρι σήμερα.